All right. Press your beans and roll your leaf. Prepare to hear the words of the wise that thwart all folly. It is once more time for Coffee and Cigars Replies. Let's talk about why some people, adventuring philosopher, hate, not dislike or avoid, but loathingly despise religion. Yes, this is another response to her, but that's because she keeps giving me so much material. And I wanted to do a fifth one after this, because she just said some stuff that proved that she's a misandrist bar none. But I'm going to let that go because I want to talk about the Oxford Union thing more. But back to Kelly. Oh. In a video in which she joins the We Hate God crowd, a video in which you find similar sentiments expressed and much more articulately by people like Jacqueline Glenn, or is it Jackie Frank now? The Antibot, Destiny, and others. Kelly performs an assault upon religion. Now, the video is at first titled Religion Harms People. We're going to talk about a second one called Christianity Spreading the Word, A New Perspective. And this could be a bit of a long video, because there's a lot of her thrusts we have to riposte. So be prepared. Get some popcorn to go along with that French press coffee and that smooth cigar. You comfy? In your high back chair? Okay, here we go. Kelly begins Religion Harms People with a claim that people are loyal to religion only because they were born in a geographical area that practiced and endorsed it. In short, Kelly doesn't believe in converts. And being a convert, I take offense to that. Her claim is that religious people haven't truly thought out the religious system's theology, and that if they did so, there would be a mass movement towards atheism. Kelly? There's this collection of books called the Talmud. In Christianity, there's a collection of works called the Summa Theologica and the Catholicism of the Catholic Church. There's books like The City of God, The Confessions, The Rules of Dominic and the Rules of Francis, Sefer HaBahir, Sefer HaZahar, the Tanya. For that matter, while we're on the subject, look at the Pali Canon. Because Kelly, thinking about religion and hammering out why people should adopt its virtues is the vital core of every religion on this planet. And not even 34 seconds into your argument, you shoot your premise full of holes because you claim that states want a religion that they can enforce to better control their populace. And you use the example of modern Iran as a proof that religion is simply a tool to control behavior. Except, Kelly, before the revolution, the one thrown by Khomeini and his ilk, the Iranians dressed, acted, and were about as nominally religious as most Westerners. And it was still the same dominant religion they were practicing, Islam, that Khomeini would bring along and dogmatically enforce with things that they hadn't been doing before. So what does that say? Does it say that the religion itself is flawed? It is. I'll go into that in another video. Or does it say that Khomeini and his goons are more morally flawed, for using it as a tool to control the populace? And does it not say that then those goons and Khomeini and his imams and his mullahs are the actual problem? And not the faith itself. Or at least not as much. Yeah, because what changed? The religion didn't change. The leadership did. And then around 47 seconds into the video, you start whining about how Christians and Jews claim they're being persecuted and they don't have any bounds to do so. But at the time of this response, Kelly, Google AI will report that tens of thousands of Christians, just in Nigeria, have been murdered by Islamist militias. This isn't even taking into account what Jewish citizens of the United States, Canada, Australia, France, Denmark, Britain, and Israel have been subjected to in form of terror attacks, firebombings, abductions, raping, murders, and deeds so prolific since 2026 that now it's shaped up to be the worst year on record since the time of the Shoah for anti-Semitic crimes. I'm not surprised about that. You particularly single out Judaism and Jews about the 55-second mark for your critique, saying, quote, and then the Christians and all the other people they like to say that they're persecuted. You know, the Jews have been playing the victim card for as long as I can remember, for as long as they've existed. They've been playing the victim in every book. End quote. Playing the victim, Kelly? Playing the victim. I am so terribly sorry. I was unaware that the Roman diaspora, the Babylonian captivity, the various offensive and odorous laws passed in Christendom upon Jewish populations, for which we get the term ghetto, the status of being a dhimmi under the rule of Islam in Andalusian Spain and all across the Muslim world, not to mention what goes on at the anti-Semitic rise in, say, the late 1800s, and then those nasty little German years, Or let's even take into account the wars of 48, 63, 67, 73, the Invitadas and the attacks on October 7th, 2023. Sorry, 2024? I think it was technically 23. I'll have to look it up. October 7th. And you dare say Jews are playing the victim? Wow. You wonder why we don't have any respect for your intellect. Oh, but then Kelly tries to have her cake and eat it too by claiming that everyone who chooses their religion and chooses what to believe or not. Wait a second. You started this argument, Kelly, with the premise that people have their religion chosen for them. Kelly, do you know what the definition of a contradiction is? Apparently not. Then you claim that any attempt at proselytization is a sign of weakness upon the religious evangelist making the attempt. Now, I assume you mean that this is a weakness of the validity of the religious system, because you go on to imply that such a codified system isn't really valid in and of itself. That people should be able to arrive at truth on their own. But Kelly, you also just said that everyone chooses what they believe. So if someone doesn't believe what the evangelist believes, why wouldn't the evangelist, who is convinced that they have the truth, be interested in changing their mind? I mean, secularly, you could compare that to people who had to convince climate change deniers of climate change, or vaccine deniers that vaccines actually help prevent the spread of disease. And Kelly, you were pro-jab and expressed concerns about the environment all the time in your videos. And I have to assume that you ranting at the camera as you do is an attempt to change the minds of those that view your videos. So wouldn't that be a sign of weakness in what you believe, Kelly? You see how stupid that argument is? She further states that anyone needing a rule book to live by, i.e. she means like a Bible, must be morally or intellectually weak. Okay. The argument that people following codified rules and restrictions penned by authorities for the believer by those they've never met somehow makes them intellectually or morally weak is stupid. She further claims that one presumes she's implying this also applies to other enlightened souls that agree with her, i.e. she means other atheists, that she doesn't need any formalized set of behaviors or restrictions to be a good person. But Kelly, in videos critical of Trump and other conservatives, you routinely make accusations that what they are doing is illegal, which are transgressions against laws that are written in books, decided upon by authorities that they and you have never met. Huh. Kind of like how you were critiquing those religious people for living by rules penned by authorities they never. Yeah, you see where that's going? And Kelly, much like other atheists who have tried to make this argument, What you are referring to as kindness and morality wasn't established by an individual nor by a society, but by things being good and evil in and of themselves. Now, granted, this gets into some religious views, but let's look at it. Religious codes are merely the record of what people practicing that religion have been able to prove is or is not good. And often this is in direct opposition to the morality of the larger society of the time that the religion evolved within. There's a statement in the Talmud that hatred begins at Sinai. That's where, Moshe comes down from the mountain, has the 10 statements, as well as the foundation of Judaism and the laws. The idea being that once you have a moral truth, people that don't have it will hate you, right? For instance, Kelly, in some societies of the past, one that you've actually liked to critique often, there was nothing considered to be immoral about enslaving people. Did that make slavery ethically right? Is slavery good? No. Slavery in and of itself is wrong, no matter what the society or the individuals practicing it say about it. And in other videos of yours, you've agreed to that above premise. Why you can't see that an individual might decide upon their own to believe that something is good which isn't so is beyond me, unless you're being purposely dishonest to feed your ego. After all your rants against conservatives use the idea that they aren't aware or they don't care that what they are doing is wrong as the main premise. Right? So you clearly actually understand this concept. You just don't want to admit that you're violating it. Then Kelly claims that those attempting to spread a religious code are colonizing people's minds, whatever that means, and preventing them from using their own thinking. Except earlier in this video, Kelly, you said we decide what we believe. So couldn't someone decide not to believe the religious evangelist trying to convert them, as you have so proudly claimed yourself as done against your sister's programming? I mean, your other videos, you proudly bragging you left the Christian faith and you don't believe in God anymore. About the 219 mark of this video, Religion Harms People, Kelly goes after Christian theology specifically and tries to present the access argument as a reason to be skeptical of religion. Now, Christianity happens to be particularly vulnerable to this argument, unlike its sister religions of Islam and its parent religion of Judaism. Asian religions are also fairly immune to this argument. Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Shinto would all be undaunted by this approach if she were to use it as an attack against them. But Kelly focuses almost all of her ire on Christianity and Judaism. That's understandable. She's an American. Those are the predominant religions in America. To understand why this is a thorny issue for Christians and why Kelly's using it as an attack, you have to understand that it is part of Christian dogma that God is perfect. And so, he has to be perfectly fair. Got that? God can't be unjust. Okay, let's continue. This argument goes something like this access argument. If you have the one true faith to reach paradise, then why does God allow people to be born in eras or locations that could not hear this message? Skelly, that's good. Kelly specifically uses the examples of Muslim women trapped in modern Iran. She proposes that God must be unfair for placing them in a place where they wouldn't be able to believe in Christianity and so have to automatically go to hell. Except, Kelly, there is a sizable Christian minority in Iran, and there has always been a Christian presence there since the end of the 1st century Common Era. You picked a bad example. But I understand the general gist of your attack. It would apply to someone like born on a desert island or a small island that never heard about Christianity. So let's look at it. Kelly's attack reveals that she has a lack of something about Christian dogma. You see, Christians have this belief they're required to go out into the world and inform everyone of their faith's path to salvation. It's called the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world and preach my gospel to every creature. You tell he was a preacher's kid. Now this, admittedly, gives the people who propose the access argument as proof against Christianity leverage, because why would an all-powerful God need to rely upon human agents to spread his gospel? No. Why wouldn't he put big flaming letters in the sky that everybody can read that say, hey, I'm here, this is what you need to do? But what Kelly ignores is that given that Christians are adamantly pro-free will, except for those idiotic Calvinists and their descendants who are into predestination. The world couldn't be structured any other way given Christian belief. A world in which God comes down, performs miracles to be seen, routinely, constantly, not at some time off in the past or not some area where you have to hear about it later. We're talking about God showing up every day, every Sunday at church to perform miracles. That's a world in which true free will vanishes, because who, if they met God, would doubt him? Right? If God performs these obvious signs, let's go with the aforementioned flaming letters in the sky revealing the truth, who would ever doubt that? And so free will disappears. And free will is central to Christian theology. Again, except for the aforementioned Calvinists. Her argument would be better turned against Christianity in regard to a different era of history. And I've actually used this argument myself to point out to evangelical Christians why I'm not in their boat. If the one true path to paradise is relying upon the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, then what about the Neanderthals? Humans have been on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years, assuming we're restricting the argument to humans that can conjure abstraction and have abstract thought, i.e. spiritual thought. Throw in humanoid ancestors who were earlier than Homo sapiens, or older than Homo sapiens neanderthalis, and you might have some rhetorical opponent try to weasel out of this argument with the murky issue of claiming that those people weren't fully human and so they didn't really have souls. I personally consider that response to be damned cowardly, by the way. Do Neanderthals go to heaven? And a Christian, especially a fundy, has to be very careful how they answer this question. Because answer it one way, and you turn God into a tyrant. Answer it the other way, and you turn God into a tyrant. The amount of semantic and theological backflips required to land a convincing argument for Neanderthals going to heaven and yet retain a hold on Christian dogma, it's pretty impressive. The usual response I hear is that if the person could not have known about the gospel, then they are judged by some arbitrary measure of how good they were. But that violates the need for the salvific event of the crucifixion. If you're judged on how good you were by what you knew, why did Jesus need to die? Or we'll hear that if someone died and hadn't heard the gospel, then they're judged upon what they did know about God, and they lived up to it accordingly. Which means there's a way to know God independent of Christianity. So why would Jesus need to die? And what if that culture's religious code that they're living by to know God has something very barbaric and murderous within it? Like, say, how the Aztecs used to love their human sacrifices to feed the sun. Yeah. An even more deadly claim against Christianity would be, would a Neanderthal getting such a pass into heaven as compared to a modern believing Christian having to have Jesus Christ's salvation to expunge his sins? Wouldn't the only real sin then the modern person have committed be that they were born in an era after Jesus lived, something over which they have no control, making God unfair? And some people will state that those born before Christ's life, death, and resurrection automatically go to perdition, hell. This belief is based upon an erroneous understanding of the Jewish cosmology and confuses the place of Sheol, the grave or the pit, in that structure with something like Gehenna. But if God were to automatically set aside souls purposely to be punished forever, then that would also make God unfair. I'm looking at you, Calvinists. So what gives? If God is unfair either way, how doesn't the whole structure fall down? Well, in my opinion, it does fall apart. But believing Christians will add patches or steps or other theological backflips, as I like to call them, to this basic process to get those that died before Christ to a judgment where God is still left as being fair. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're putting that person before God's throne, allowing God to use his discretion to decide whether or not they're going to burn forever or they're going to be part of heaven. And they live their lives basically having to ignore or somehow make peace with that theological dissonance in their brain. Now, don't mistake me. Those Christians might actually be correct. I just don't happen to believe it to be so. And interesting enough, Islam doesn't have this problem. So it's simple counter that all systems that came before it were corrupt, and God still redeemed some souls during his time, and the Quran calls those, they were Muslims, so they have a consistent thing there's always been on Islam. And Judaism only has this problem somewhat compared to the Christian approach. Judaism prefers to take an approach not like Greek philosophy. Essentially, Judaism states that there are some eternal, universal standards by which everyone is judged, be they Jewish or not. And adherence to these, they're called the Noahide laws, assures someone a place in the world to come. But Christianity and Islam assign arbitrarily, leaving it up to God's judgment. Judaism instead establishes as verifiable standards of behavior and ethical benchmarks for every soul throughout all of time. In short, Judaism is very interested in making God fair, which is where Christians picked it up from. Now, this attack at using souls from a different era than the modern one would have been a much better thrust for Kelly. But you didn't make it, did you? Instead, you tried to go after the religious person's character, citing various religious people's failure to uphold their religious standards as proof that they are inferior to yourself, morally speaking. And one assumes that you also are implying to other atheists, and uses as proof that religion makes one immoral to their core. But Kelly, you just cited Christian dogma. That's the sinful nature of man. The reason why people need a religious code is to train them out of bad moral behavior and faulty thinking. And before her defenders counter, if you need a religion to learn to be a good person, then you're a bad person, like Michael McConaughey's character Russ Cold does in True Detective. Let me ask you something. You ever raised a kid? Do children know automatically what is right and wrong? They know automatically, internally, what it is to be moral and ethical? Or are they a tabula rasa? Are they a blank slate? It's the latter, and Kelly, having raised children as a parent, should know that. Warning, warning, Jewish theology moment. People aren't good or evil. We have within us an inclination to good and an inclination to evil. And these two things are always vying for us to choose between them. From our parents' instruction, our religious training, and our spiritual learning and experiences, we train ourselves to be good rather than evil. Hopefully. Sadly, there are people that decide to train themselves the other way. Kelly would cut 2 legs off of that stool. She doesn't realize what a disaster that would be. I want you for a moment to think about what the world would be like without your parents teaching you what is right and wrong. Terrifying, isn't it? Kay then also goes into tonight that religion, at least how it's practiced in the modern era, has some wiggle room in accepting things that were once verboten or outside its strictures. For instance, she picks upon parents who won't accept homosexual children because of their religious indoctrination. Okay. That completely ignores denominations like the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, and other liberal Christian churches who not only accept homosexual members, but will ordain them. It also ignores Jewish movements like Jewish Renewal, Reconstructionism, and the Reform movement who accept homosexual members. It even ignores the practice of hardline churches, in quotes, and movements such as Catholicism and the conservative Orthodox Jewish movements, who, while they won't ordain a homosexual, will allow them to attend services and pray for that person to try to convince them that that petitioner should give up their sin like they would give up any other sin. You may not like that, but that's not the same thing as oppression, now is it? No. Instead, Kelly wants to portray all Christians and Jews as members of the Westboro Baptist Church. She would have you walk away from her videos believing that Christians are out there waving signs decrying everybody they're sending them to hell. Now, I realize that this video coming after the video I put up about the Peace March speech may seem like Kelly's got purchase here. Until you realize how many Christians didn't have a problem with the Buddhist monks walking for peace, who saw the monks as looking for a temporal goal, that of peace in the world, while the spiritual goal for Christians of an eternal peace through Jesus Christ is not violated by that. And let's take this out of the realm for a moment of the Abrahamic faiths. Would Kelly say the same thing about members of Asatru, Wicca, Thelema, or other neo-pagan or Hermetic movements, that somehow they are limited by their religious thinking because they may not accept homosexual members? Yeah, I think not. Now, part of that's because, particularly in Wicca, there's large acceptance for homosexuals already. But that's not always the case. And I'm pretty sure Kelly wouldn't critique those new religions for that, because her eye is directed specifically at Christianity and Judaism. And this is a recurring theme in her thought. She even accuses religious people as being racist because they are religious, not accepting the choices their children may make to marry members of another race or creed. Kelly, I've read the Bible several times, what people call the Old Testament and the New Testament. I've read many of the works of the church fathers. I've read almost all in the Talmud. Nowhere in the Judeo-Christian tradition, nowhere is there a commandment to hate someone based upon their race. Racists who claim Christianity will say, well, we're going to use the unequally yoked verse. But that wasn't talking about race. That was talking about religion. If I remember correctly, it's Paul. I was talking about he doesn't want Christians married to people who aren't Christians. He's afraid that doing so you might lose your faith. He's not talking about race. And Kelly, if that were so, that religious people in the States are somehow racist, you got some explaining to do, because according to Google AI, the United States has right now between a 17 to 19% intermarriage rate between the races. 1 out of 5 new marriages in the United States aren't concerned about skin color or ethnicity. I think perhaps, Kelly, you're projecting some unresolved racism of your own here. She tries to finish the video by claiming that the government, I assume she means the current United States government led by Trump, the Trump administration, is telling people to hate foreigners. The unmitigated hatred on this wench. No one in the current administration is telling the American people to hate someone based on the color of their skin, their ethnicity, or their creed. Kelly, Trump's cabinet has Marco Rubio in it. Not a white guy. Kash Patel, not a white guy. His daughter converted to Judaism. These are all facts, Kelly. And I'm sure she would try to use sound bites and policies such as ICE actions to prove her point. But in all those cases, a specific criminal concern, such as illegal entry into the United States, or concerns for past criminal actions by those who have entered the United States illegally, are what is being expressed, not racism. Unless, of course, Kelly, you're trying to insinuate that people from foreign countries are criminals? Spain might agree with you on that right now. Now, clearly, Kelly's got some past trauma with religion. And in her video, Christianity and Spreading the Word, A New Perspective, She relates how in her childhood her older sister was essentially her parental figure because her parents were alcoholics. I think I spoke about this earlier before in another video. Kelly spends that entire video bashing her sister. The sister who raised her when her parents wouldn't because they were alcoholics. Kelly spends the whole video being an ungrateful little shite, in my opinion. She complains that she never felt the spiritual experience her sister was trying to convince her she needed to feel through Christianity. But then Kelly found that spiritual meaning by connecting through nature, which is, of course, far superior to the Bible or the church. And so now she can't stand her sister for imposing upon Kelly a worldview which Kelly classifies as having made her feel inferior for much of her life. Kelly, the entire book of Psalms is filled with nature imagery to invoke God's wonder. The Christian faith has a tradition of hermitage and pilgrimage that throws one into the world, the natural world, participating in God's creations. For God's sakes, the Bible you despise begins with mankind in a freaking garden as stewards of the earth, caretaking its flora and fauna. Of course God speaks to us through the material world. How did you miss that? Because you wanted to. She then complains that the Christianity expressed by her sister, which she says would have neglected this natural world phenomenon, which it doesn't, also messed up her son's mind when her sister told him that he had evil forces, evil spirits attempting to win his soul. Kelly, according to Christian theology, everybody has evil spirits trying to sway them away from Jesus Christ and his salvation. But I get that what you were specifically probably alluding to, if it's the same child, was a son of yours that you've characterized as being transsexual in another video. It's not surprising your very religious sister would be concerned for that person because of her theology. But then you have the audacity to tell the viewer that if they happen to be a Christian, they should just shut up because what they say messes people up. They shouldn't spread their view and try to help other people by giving them the truth about things and helping them improve their thinking. So Christians shouldn't follow your own example, Kelly? Because isn't that what you're doing with your videos? Trying to change how people think and make them better, according to you? This kind of hypocrisy is typical of Kelly, and I would argue it's also a trait we see in much of the progressive left's rhetoric. And in the next Replies video, we're going to talk about how this very same phenomenon manifests in the arguments that were proffered at the Oxford Union against the proposition that the West should be skeptical of Islam, including the slip admitted to by the president of the Debating Society that Islam can be violent and is probably violent in structure when it feels attacked, when she told Tommy Robinson that were it not for her protection, that of a Muslim woman, the Muslims outside the house would have, quote, cooked him, implying physical harm. You can't make this stuff up. And as you can tell in the Reply series so far, I see a consistent failure amongst people on the progressive left to think logically, to truly look at their argument and analyze it and see if it's valid. And we're going to see more of that soon. Don't worry, this won't be the last time we talk about Kelly. I have no doubts about that. But we're going to leave her alone for a while, because there's a lot more idiots out there than just her.